What's up YouTube, this is Tubedigga. This video is a complete beginner's guide to drum programs. You might have seen my last video where I covered the interrelationship between sequences, tracks and programs. Well, this video is a complete beginner's guide to just drum programs. So if you've not seen that video on sequences, tracks and programs, I urge you to go and watch that first. If not, just stick around for this. I'll also be doing additional videos where I'm going to cover key group programs and all the editing options for those, as well as clip programs and MIDI programs. I'm going to first take you through how to load your samples into a program, and then that's a good starting point for me to then start editing those sounds so you've actually got something to reference. So I'm going to press and hold my shift button and then press menu at the same time, and that will give us access to our directories. We're first met with the internal directory of the MPC Live, and we've got access to all these different programs. We've got samples, we've got instruments, okay, and we've got a folder that says My Files. I don't use this. I store all my own files on my SD card. Content is the internal content of the MPC Live or MPC-X, and places are any additional external drives that you've got inserted or connected to the MPC Live. I'm going to be working in my SD card. So the reason why I don't recommend you use the internal drive for storage, it is good if you're lacking storage and you haven't got anything else to rely on, but the problem with that is the internal drive of the MPC Live and MPC-X is not readable or accessible by your computer. So when you boot it into controller mode to work on your computer or to transfer files, you don't get access to the internal drive. So don't save anything that you've made on the internal drive if you're hoping to access it on your computer. It's best to have an SD card inserted, or a USB stick, or a USB external hard drive. If you want to go super fancy and super advanced, you can open up the back of your MPC Live or MPC-X and install a solid state drive, which would probably be the best option. But I've had no problems whatsoever with my current SD card. So I'm going to be working off of that. So that's that out of the way. So I'm going to go to samples, and then I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to choose drums and perc. So double tap on that. And in this folder, I've got a load of 808 sounds. I'm going to load all the sounds from that folder in there. To load all the sounds from a folder, rather than double tapping that folder and selecting them, okay, which is good if you just want to be selective with all the sounds that you load in, but this really isn't going to take up too much memory if I load all of these in because they're all short. But I'm going to go up one level and I'm going to select that folder again. I'm not going to go into it, but I'm going to press and hold shift. And as you can see, we get these options. We can format this drive, which I definitely don't want to do. I can delete this file or this folder, or if I go into the folder, I could delete any files within it. And it will also give me info for that drive. And the last option is the one that I'm going to choose now. I'm going to load all those samples. So it's a really convenient way to load everything in, and then you can just assign those samples to your drum pads. So I'm going to press load all, and there you go, super quick. So we know that we're not using a lot of data there anyway. Now we can go to the dedicated program editor and assign these samples, but there's another way we can do it. We can go to here, sample assign. So we can just press that. It's right next to browse where we were looking at our directories. And now we get the sample pool showing up of all these samples that we've loaded in. And then it's just a simple case of making sure that you've got a pad highlighted, and then you can just use your data wheel or your finger to go up and down and select the different samples, and you can see that they're changing within the pad that we're currently selected. Okay, so this is obviously an 808 bass drum, 808 BD 751, and as soon as any sample is now loaded onto that, we'll be able to hear it. If we just scroll through, I'm not tapping the drum pad, it's literally because I'm scrolling through and highlighting all those different sounds, and I'm auditioning those. Now if we don't want to audition those, we just click the audition button and we can switch auto to off, and now we can't hear those samples. We can also switch it back on and set the level of that if it's a bit too loud for us. Anyway, that's that. Let's close that. Now, the other option we get to is to clear the pad. So if I just press that, that will just clear that. But if I move the data wheel again or touch on any of the samples, it then loads it back in. I'm going to load some of these in. So I'm just tapping on the pads. You can also tap on the physical pads, which I'm doing now. Most of these are kick drums, these initial ones, so it's probably pointless me loading all those in. Let's load some different samples. They're clap, that'll do. That's basically how you can assign samples from this sample assign mode. So let's now press menu and we go back to the menu page and now press program edit, and this is our program editor for the drum program. So now I'm going to take you through all the options in these 6 different tabs that you see at the bottom of the MPC Live screen. I'm just going to move my MPC Live a little bit because it seems to have shifted a bit. So we've got our samples in. This up here says master. This is the master settings for this entire program. So we can set the polyphony to a certain amount. So we've got 32 voices in total with the polyphony. We can restrict it, okay, to anything beneath that. Or we could simply just put it into monophonic mode. And the very first option we get is polyphonic mode. Okay, so it's polyphonic, monophonic, or a specific polyphony setting or voice count setting, right? So you might assume that monophonic would be ideal for drums, but not necessarily, because if I'm playing 16ths on the hi-hat, those hi-hats, or rather the notes for those hi-hats, are going to fall on the same steps as some of the kicks and snares. So I wouldn't recommend using monophonic. I'd set it to polyphonic, and then I would use something called mute groups, which are up here. I've covered those in another video where I talk about mute groups. Don't worry, I will return to this. So we're going to leave that as polyphonic. Remember, this is the settings for the entire program that we're looking at just at the moment. So the next one over is semitunes. AKAI refer to it as semitunes. It's basically semitones. I'm going to play all my drum pads and I'm going to start moving that, and you'll hear all of the sounds decline in pitch. And the same goes for the fine tuning. Obviously it's fine tuning, you couldn't really hear a massive difference. But anyway, that changes the fine tuning for the entire program. Next down, we've got pad. Okay, so this is for the particular pad that you're focused on. So I'm going to press the first pad. So just keep an eye on what's happening there, and that's showing you which pad I'm tapping on if you're a bit confused. Obviously you can't see my pad, so it's a good way to reference that. So we're on our first pad with our classic 808 kick. So this is the main volume for the entire pad, but I'm just going to go out of this page for a sec to the samples page. As you'll notice, we've got these 3 little dots underneath where it says samples, and it's the only tab or page that we have that has got these additional sub pages. So if we click on that again, we get these other sub pages. So on the second one, we can adjust all the different layers. So if we had additional sounds on here, we can adjust the level for all those different samples. But I'm going to go back to master. That is the main volume for your pad. Then you've got the main panning for that actual pad. But again, if we go to this third page, we've also got separate panning for all the layers. Okay? So no matter what this is set at, you can also adjust the panning beyond that master pad panning setting. Simultaneous play. What is that? Okay, so we're on pad A01. We can select another pad, or rather we can select another 4 pads to be simultaneously triggered by one pad. So I'm just going to do it for one additional pad. I'm going to trigger the third pad, which has got a hi-hat on it. I'm not going to do the snare because a kick and a snare on top of each other doesn't really make sense. So now I'm going to trigger my first pad, and as you can hear, it's triggering the hi-hat. If we turn it off, just back to our kick drum. So we could choose the hi-hat like I just did. Let's choose a different one. Let's choose, I think some of these might be kicks, I've forgotten now. But let's just see what happens. And there you go, it's triggering a clap. I think it's triggering the clave and maybe another kick drum. So that's really handy if you have used all your layers up and you want to trigger an additional pad with even more layers. Okay, so you could essentially be triggering up to 20 different samples because you've got the 4 samples that you're actually triggering and you've got these additional 16 other samples. Obviously they're pads and they've all got 4 layers each. 4 times 4 is 16 plus your additional 4 of the pad that you're triggering. So that's 20 samples you could just trigger just from one pad. Anyway, that's what simultaneous play does. Great stuff. What's mute target? I've just actually remembered I have covered this in another video, but it was part of a different video that covered other stuff, but didn't specifically focus on programs like I'm doing in this video. Anyway, mute target is similar to simultaneous play. This is quite good if you want to do something like choke an open hat with a closed hat. So I didn't load in an open hat, so I'm going to do that now. So I'm going to press and hold shift, press menu. So O, that comes before S, doesn't it? I think so. And it comes after M. There you go. That'll do, perfect. No, that one's even better. Let's go back to menu, go back to program edit. Okay, so on pad 7 we've got that open hat, and on pad 3 we've got the closed hat. I can now select pad 7 to be the mute target for pad 3. And as you can hear, it gets choked when I trigger pad 3. There's another way that we can do this with mute groups, but I will show you the difference between mute target and mute groups. So that's what mute target does. And as you can see, we've got another 3 targets that we could set for that. Okay, I'm not going to explain every scenario of why that's useful. It's something that's good for you to think about yourself. So I've taken you through all these here. Just a point to mention on this gold box that you see here, this relates to the Q links. So the default Q link behavior, if you just look up to the top right of your MPC, if you press and hold your Q link button, you now get these options for the Q links, okay? It will just click out of it if you take your finger off the Q link button. So you have to press and hold it. It's just a quick access to the modes that you can put the Q links in. And the default mode for Q links is screen. That's to say whatever screen you're in, you can edit certain parameters depending on whether you see this gold box. I've actually done a video on all the Q link modes, so I'm not going to go into those in this video. I have done a completely separate video on that, so please go and check that out after you've watched this if you want to get more in-depth knowledge about the Q links and all the different modes. But I just need to show you that we're currently in screen mode, which is the default Q link mode, right? So I'm going to release that again and go back to the program editor. Now, as you can see, we've got this gold box, and that will tell us that the first 3 knobs, starting from the top in the first bank, you might notice that your first LED underneath your Q link button is lit. If you just press your Q link button but don't hold it, it will just jump through those LEDs, and obviously this jumps down now. And that's just showing us all the things that we can select and modify with those 4 Q link knobs. So I'm going to go back to the first one. So the very top knob will change the polyphony if we want to use the knob to do that rather than tapping on it or using the data wheel. So there's 3 different ways. We can use the data wheel, tap on it. As I've shown you with other menus, you can scroll through. I find it easiest just to highlight it and use the data wheel. Okay, but it might be more preferable for you to use the Q links and just flick through them there. So that's the top Q link. If you now turn your second Q link down, that will adjust the semitones or the semi-tuning for the master for the entire program, and the fine. And that's the third knob down. The fourth knob down doesn't do anything because we've not got a parameter there to change. Now if we press the Q-Link button again, we jump down to the second row. And now we can use the middle two knobs. So it's literally just corresponding to the knobs, okay? So it's now the second knob down, we can control the volume, and third knob down is the pan. And again, we'll press it here and then we can swap out our different, or choose our different simultaneous play targets, all with the Q-Link knobs. Okay, you have to press, you can't just like select this or tap on this, you have to press your Q-Link button to make those highlighted with that gold bounding box, or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, that's what that does. So these are just graphics to show you that it's a drum program. That's the drum program icon, and this is the program name. We can't double tap on that and select another program. We've only got one drum program, but I guarantee if I added additional programs, you wouldn't be able to select them from there. Here is flatten pad, and this is shown in all the other menus. You can flatten the pad from any of these other pages or menus. So flatten pad is basically a way to resample in situ. What that means is that I can add some effects to this pad, or the sample that's on this pad. I can change the pitch of it, I can reverse it, I can do all this crazy stuff to it, then choose to flatten it, and it will bake those changes into that sample, and that sample will be put on that pad as a new sample. It's non-destructive, so you will retain the original sample. So we've got this hi-hat sound. Okay, so I'm going to make some changes to it. I'm going to go to the samples page. I'm going to adjust the semitunes or the semitones. I'm going to go to effects, double tap. I'm going to choose, let's choose a reverb large. Okay, so now it sounds like that. And go back to the master page. Let's press flatten again. I've given it a long enough audio tail to capture that reverb. We can edit the name. Let's edit to CH verb, so we know it's a closed hat with reverb on it, and just press do it. And now make sure, okay, so what it does is it resets the semitones, because now we don't need them. We want to hear all those changes, exactly what we wanted to bounce it to, if you see what I mean. And there you go. That is now on that pad. That is not the original one, that's the original one, the closed hat there. But now we've got closed hat verb. And it also gets rid of the effects, which is handy. So we don't double up on that reverb effect. So that's really cool. Just a point to mention on that, if you did change the semitones of the program, it would actually still have that changed, and you'd play that pad back and it wouldn't sound how you wanted it to sound. This doesn't get flattened, or rather reset after you've flattened the pad. Anyway, that's what flatten pads does, and as I said, you can access it from any of these other additional pages in your program editor. So what's this over here? Let's press on that. This is edit zones. So it says pad A03 there. If we double tap on that, or just click it once rather, it's the same thing. I'm not too sure why they designed it this way. I think that's a tiny little bit confusing. It's the same function, okay, so whether you tap on that actual graphic there or this one here, it will still take you to edit zones. But it's just so you can see, if we tap on another pad, that will change. This is the edit zones icon, and this is the pad identifier. Okay, but yeah, I mean, it's not that much of a problem, but I think that could be designed better. Maybe a bounding box covering that, so you know that that's the entire edit zones button to press. So the default mode is current. So whatever pad that we've tapped on, we're currently editing that pad. But we can also choose multiple pads. So let's say we wanted to apply the same filter to multiple pads. We'd select whatever pads we wanted. So I've selected my first 4 pads there. Okay, then we'd close that, then we go to the filter, and as you can see now, it's showing us that I've selected those 4 pads, and whatever I change within any of these pages will now be applied to all of those pads. all except any effects. If we now add an effect, let's just add the first one, auto wah, and press select. Okay, let's go back to edit zones, go back to current, so we can just choose one of them and see what effect. Now it's showing us that that auto wah is on pad 4, and that's because it was the last pad that we selected when we chose multiple zones. But as you can see, it hasn't put that effect. So don't expect multiple pads or all pads, which is the third option, to apply your insert effects. It won't do it. It will only apply that effect to the last pad that you pressed. So I'm going to delete that. Just thought I'd show you that, it's quite important. So that's what multiple does. Also remember that it will remember the last 4 pads or the last however many pads. You can choose all the pads if you want in whatever bank. Okay, make some pretty patterns at the same time. In fact, I don't know why I'm going to do this. Let's just see if we can do something. No, I'll try to do a smiley face, something I find hard to do in real life. Okay, so that's multiple and current, and so you get that. I mean, you can choose any of your other banks. You've got your pad bank buttons up the top of your MPC Live. I can't remember where they are on the MPCX, probably somewhere similar. But if you flick through the different pad banks, okay, I'm now on pad bank C, and there you go. Okay, you can't double tap them on there, okay? It doesn't work. It's not an interactive screen like that. You have to use your physical pads to then choose the pads that you want to edit. And all will do all. Now you can see they're all highlighted. So every single pad or sample that you've got loaded into this program will be affected when you edit a parameter. So the default one is current, and that's the safest one to use. It's something that trips me up quite often. I'll be editing something and I'll go, oh no, I've got it in all. And then I've found that I've actually been editing that parameter for all the sounds. You have got multiple states of undo, so that is a good use of the undo because you can undo some really annoying changes. Again, it's not a fault of the MPC or the way it's designed, it's just something that you as the user has to be aware of. Particularly if you're editing all zones or multiple zones and you do some kind of change to the sample that's loaded into that actual pad. Okay, from this second page we can load the sample in here, but if we had our edit zones selected as all or even multiple, and then we were to change that, it would put the same sample on all those pads or the selection of multiple pads. So you've got to be careful of that. That's something that has tripped me up. But again, that is user error really. It's something that you have to just make sure that you haven't done yourself. Now up here we've got our automation button. Automation applies to internal things within the MPC Live. You can't use the automation feature on something like a MIDI program and automate the parameters of a MIDI synth with this. If you are going to automate the parameters of an external MIDI synth that's being triggered by a MIDI program on the MPC Live or MPCX, you have to put it into record mode on the actual sequencer. So I'll just do a quick demo for you. Let's go back to our first pad. So I'm just going to tap in some notes in the sequencer and just create a really simple little sequence. Okay, so we've got this little bass pattern going out. Now we're in right automation mode. Okay, if I press my Q-Link knob, then we've got our gold bounding box. And I'm going to use the second Q-Link knob down to automate the semitones. And then go into read mode, and there you go. Again, I've got other videos that have covered automation recording and the Q-Link setup, so please just go and check out my entire playlist. There's going to be something related to what I'm doing in this video in one of those other videos. So on all 16 pads there's samples now, so I'm going to automate all these different simultaneous play targets. So that's all the options in just the first page of the program editor. The only other option that I've not shown on this page, which is also shown on every other page, is just your system resources. It shows you how much battery you've got. Mine's at 100% because I'm running off of AC power at the moment. But if you were on battery, that would decrease and show you how much battery you got left. This is your CPU usage. And this last one is the memory. So that's the amount of RAM that you've got to play with in your entire system. You can purge and you can choose unused samples or all samples. So from here, we obviously get access to the waveform. Everything up here is pretty much the same, but you'll notice now we've got a cog symbol. So let's press that. That gives us settings to link any slices. So if we've chopped up a program and we've got like a slice program, and we can choose to link the slices or set that to off. What that does is if it's set to on, it means any adjustments to the start or the end of a slice, because it doesn't destructively slice a sample. You can, but if you choose a non-destructive slice type, it means that it's just putting anchor points on that sample. And if you link slices, if you move the start point of one region, it will affect the end point of the previous region. And likewise, if you move the end point of a region, the region that comes after that in the sample over time, that will also move in to correspond with the adjustments you made with the sample that's either before it or after it, if that makes sense. If you set it to off, then you can select a region of that sample independently. If you want to go and check out my video on how to use the MPC Live as a synthesizer, I do actually cover all these settings. Loop lock allows you to set an independent loop point instead of it just looping between the start and the end. So at the moment it's set to on, and you'll see it will just loop from the start to the end. But if we press off, now we get this additional loop anchor, and we can set the actual loop start and end point. Okay, it hasn't got its independent endpoint from the actual end. It will still use the endpoint. Okay, it doesn't have an additional loop endpoint as well as the main endpoint. And zero snap is good if you set it to on. Basically, it allows you to get a smoother loop point, and it kind of reduces any clicks. And occasionally, if you're lucky, it will get rid of those clicks completely. That's what zero snap is good for. But if you set it to off, then you can move that completely freely and find your own ideal point for the sample to end or loop. That's what that does. And all the other options I've taken you through up there. Now, you can see that we've also got this gold box around the sample field. Please don't get excited. I've mentioned this before. It also has a Q there, which means it's a Q linkable parameter. So if we click on our Q links, or I need to click on it, we can jump through there, and you can see it's choosing the different options. So as you can see, we're now highlighting the start point. But unfortunately, you can't record automate, or write automate, should I say, the start and end point. So I've put my MPC into write automation mode. We've focused on the start point, which is the second Q link down. Now I can move that with the Q link, but let's press play and make some changes. Put it into, well, read mode, and there you go. It's not making any changes to that. And I believe that's because you've got access to so many layers, so many pads, so many samples. It would probably really take up a ton of CPU for the MPC Live to be processing all these different start and end points. But you never know, AKAI might pull it out the bag in the near future and say, now you can automate start and end points. And that would be just the absolute game changer for a lot of people who like doing glitchy stuff. People, should I say? I think I said peepoo. For a lot of peepoo. Anyway, so you can't automate start and end or loop points. So forget about it. All right, just forget about it. So these are your layers. As said, you've got 4 layers. The default one is layer 1, and that's where we've loaded our first sample. We can delete it from that little delete icon. We can double tap on it and choose another sample from the menu. We can use our data wheel to select the sample. Now, slice, I usually try and remember to set all my slices to pad, because if you have the same sample loaded onto, let's actually do it, copy, select the pad that you want to copy, tap on the screen, select the pad that you want to copy that pad to. Okay, so I'm going to copy mine to pad 9 and then do it. Now we've got the same sample on pad 1 and pad 9. We're in all for the slice mode. If I now move the start point of pad 9, if we go down to pad 1, it's done the same, because it's looking at the same sample and adjusting its default start point. Let's also go to the sample editor and you'll notice that that is reflected there. Okay, so that's like its master start and end point setting, so to speak. If we set it to pad, it's now got its own independent start and end point. So if we go up to pad 9, it's still in that position there. If we press pad 1, it's got its own independent. Okay, so let's go up to pad 9 and change that to pad. And now that's got its own independent start and end point settings. Okay, go back to pad 1 and that's still there. So that's what that does. Just be wary of that, because you might have the same sample on multiple pads, have slice set to all, make some nice adjustments to your start and end points, and then try and do it to the other pads and you'll be like, oh, they're all the same. So just be wary of that. That's the semitones, obviously. Fine tuning. We can reverse the sample. Okay, that reverses our sample. Simple enough. At the bottom, we've got warp. I'm not a big fan of this because I think the algorithm needs a lot of work. It does sound very jittery and glitchy. I've only used it very subtly in a couple of tracks that I've made where I just needed a quick way of getting things timed up to a very short sample, so it wasn't that noticeable. But it really isn't my favourite algorithm, and I think AKAI could do a lot more to improve this. It's certainly not comparable to the dedicated time stretching or pitch shifting algorithms within the actual sample editor or the main sample editor. But within the program, I mean, to be honest, it probably is because it would also take up an awful lot of CPU, because this is a live effect, so to speak. It's just putting it on top of this sample temporarily, if you see what I mean. So at the moment, okay, you can hear that it's doing some weird thing now that we've warped it. If we take the BPM sync off, it will sound the same. But now if we stretch it, we can stretch it to a given value. But we've only got to move it a few sort of percent forward or back, and we get these weird artifacts. Now, they could be totally usable if you're doing some glitchy music or you want to do some sound effects, but if you want it to sound natural, it's not going to happen with warp, okay? But that's what warp does, and it's affected by the stretch parameter and the BPMs, okay? So that's just calculated the BPM of this kick drum to 160 for some reason, okay? And we've got BPM sync. So have a play about with those, but that's what they do. I'm not going to go heavily into all the different variables that you could get by changing those, okay? Now, pad loop is grayed out because that will only be activated if you change the playback mode of the actual pad, which is found in the LFO modulation page. And that is either one shot or note on. It's currently set to the default, which is one shot, which will just play the sample in its entirety, you know, obviously dependent on where you've got the start and end points, but it will basically just trigger that pad, okay, and play it back as it is supposed to be heard. Note on, you'll notice I'm going to tap it now and it will just get cut off short, okay. That means we now have to go to the envelope and then adjust the release time, and we're back to normal, okay. So my process is, if I want to loop a sample, I go first of all to LFO modulation. Okay, let's set that to one shot again. So I go to LFO modulation, I choose note on. I know that now it's going to be cut off. I know, or rather, the default would be like this. And then I increase the release time, go back to the samples page, and now we can see that this is not grayed out. We can now select the type of loop we want. So this is a forward loop. Sorry, I'm going to shorten that. So that's now looping for us. You might think that we've finished on this, but we've got these 2 additional sub-menus for samples. So let's go and take a look at that. I'm going to go through these really quickly. So again, we get access to our layers. Okay, it's no different from the first sample page option here. Okay, it just gives us a different layout. But now we get access to all the semitones here, the fine tuning and the levels, okay, for each additional sample. So this page is handy if you want to balance out the different layers that are on this particular pad. And then the next subpage, or the final subpage, is the offset. So the offset will kind of start the sample from an offset position, either positively or negatively. So if we just tap on the kick drum here, and that's literally moving, not the actual initial start point here, it isn't affecting this, it's separate from that. It's more like a playback head, but it's not shifting the start point of the sample, it's shifting the playback point of that sample, if you know what I mean. So we're kind of getting rid of the attack portion there. And if we move it into a negative value, you can hear there's like quite a big gap from where I'm actually hitting the pad and it's sounding. You could probably hear my finger tapping there. So you can get some nice effects with that, and one thing I found you can do with it is you can create sort of a million different variations of a kick drum basically by just moving through all these different start points, because you get all these different textures. So offset, don't knock it, it can help you time things up, but it could also do other things if you sort of think about how you could use it in a sort of creative way. Anyway, that's the samples page covered. Pan and velocity, again we get the access to our different layers. We can pan those. Velocity start and velocity end. In a nutshell, if you take off your full level button, which is just above pad 14 on your pad grid, if you press the full level button and so it's off and the light goes dim, the pads will now respond to the amount of pressure that you put on them when you actually touch them or hit them. So if we had additional samples on the different layers of this first pad and we play about with these different start and end points, different samples will be triggered back, okay? It will sort of play the layers in kind of more of an organic fashion. This is good for getting kind of a live feel to drums, but also to musical instrument samples that you've got multiple copies of, and you kind of want to do sort of timbral changes, you know, and textural changes. So please do look into that further in the manual. I'm not going to explain it because I will admit it is not my strongest point. It's one of the things that I use the least in the MPC. Okay, so I'm going to go to the filter envelope page now. Again, we've got all the same options up here. Now we've got access to loads of different filter types. Okay, I'm not going to explain what every one of those does, but I'll tell you which ones they are. We've got low 1, low 2, low 4, low 6, low 8, high 1, high 2, high 4, high 6, high Tubedigga, high 8, band 2, band 4, band 6, band camp, band 8, band stop 2 pole, band stop 4 pole, band stop 6 pole, band stop 8 pole, band Bieber 2 pass, band Bolshevik 4 pass, band Boogie On Down 8 pass, model 1, model 2, model 3, Naomi Campbell 4, vocal 1, vocal 2, vocal 3, MPC, look at me, I'm TD, Tubedigga, yeah boy. Don't know where I was going on that. I need a donut or something to smooth me out. Anyway, so you've got loads of different filter types, and they are obviously going to be, you know, best used on different samples. Okay, I'm not going to go into those. It's kind of basic stuff, filters. but you know, how you use them is down to you. Now, the filters, I forgot to mention this. This is applied to all layers on that pad, or the entire pad. You can't set an individual filter type for the different layers. Now, don't think that that's a major restriction. That is another thing where you might have to think a bit smarter about the layers you've got. You might have to actually go, well, I really like the sample on my second layer, but I need to filter it. So then you would use simultaneous play. Then you could trigger that pad and that second layer sample and put it on a different pad, and then you'd have access to a secondary filter. Okay, sorry I jumped between those. It's getting late and I'm tired and I'm Tubedigga and I'm out. No, I'm not out yet. I'm not finished. Do you see what I mean? So you only get one filter per pad. Okay, so you might see that as a restriction, but it's not. There is a workaround for it, and that's simultaneous play or doing something else. I don't know, maybe, I don't know, shaving your cat or eating your socks. I don't care. Do something else. Don't worry about that. Anyway, you've got your cutoff, your resonance, and your envelope amount. So if you increase that, that will now apply an amount of the envelope that you set for that filter. Okay. I'm also not going to go into that heavily. I'm just showing you the options. You've got modulation sources. So the velocity can actually affect the start point of your sample. So I'm going to get a snare drum because we can't really hear that kick drum too much. Let's get rid of that second layer. Let's get, actually it's quicker just to tap on there. I'm speeding things up now because I've been on this video for ages. There's a snare drum. It's not a very good one. It's actually really bad. There you go, that's better. Right, so if we now increase, I'm in the wrong page, velocity to start. You can't really hear it too much. Let's put the note repeats on. The velocity isn't actually affecting the start point, which would be really cool because then we could kind of modulate the start point. It's basically doing what the offset does, but it's using the velocity to affect that. And that's good for drum rolls, really. So let's just try that again. Now I'm going to sort of do it at kind of harsh velocity. Let's take this off. So you can hear, even though it's quieter, we've still got the attack portion of that sample. But if we, it gives us more of a smooth kind of roll to that note repeat. Okay, that's what that does. We've also got the same thing for velocity to attack, which would kind of have a similar effect. We've got velocity to envelope. Okay. So the amount of velocity will sort of apply the amount of the envelope, the filter envelope that is. And we've actually got velocity to filter itself. So let's take that off and let's have a listen to that. So I've not got any filter applied at the moment. Let's take the cutoff down. Okay, so the less pressure, it's actually playing back at this value here, 53 at its lowest value. And as I increase the pressure, it's basically opening up the filter like that. Which gives really nice effect actually, used with the note repeat. So let's actually go back to our main page. I'm going to press my note repeat button. Then we get access to the different note repeat time divisions. I'm going to choose a really high one, 64. And I think that will be quite interesting with the velocity to filter. So you can get some really nice effects with that potentially. Filter envelope, we've got two different types. We've got a simple attack decay envelope, which it's in at the moment. So we've got attack and decay. We can adjust it from here. We can double tap on this screen and give us a larger view for fine adjustments. Okay, so we can manipulate that all on the big screen. We can choose to decay it from the start pull it out from there, or we can decay it from the end to give us more of an exponential kind of ramp there. I think that's the right term, exponential there, yeah. We can also switch the filter type from up here once we're in this larger screen. Now we've got an attack, hold, decay, sustain envelope. So we've got a lot more adjustments that we can use now, okay? Not a lot more, 2 extra ones, but you know. So that's that, okay? And of course that's reflected here in the smaller screen. And the same for your amp envelope. You've got the 2 different modes there. That's all good. That's all the filter envelope page covered. Now let's go to LFO modulation. In the top half, we've got the modes. So this is mute group. So I'm going to quickly rush through this. Say we wanted a kick and a snare to cut one another off so they never clashed. We would select the kick, change the mute group to 1, change the snare group to mute group 1. And now they will not play on top of each other. I've also covered this in another video, so go and check that out. I think it was called mute groups. I can't remember, I've done so many now. But I've definitely got a video that covers this. I apologise, I can't think which video. But this is also good for choking hi-hat. So if you've got an open hat, you would, let's say you had already used up mute group 1 for the kick and the snare, but you wanted hi-hats over the top. You would then choose another mute group for that, so mute group 2, and then you choose mute group 2 for the open hat, and they would mute each other, independently of the kick and the snare that was set to mute group 1. Okay, but I've definitely covered that in another video. If you've got any questions on mute groups, please do ask, but that's pretty much the basic functionality of mute groups. So layers, the layers that I've shown you in the samples page that you've got access to, if we now set them to cycle, so I'm going to put some different layers on layer 2, or different samples on the layers, should I say. Just make sure I've got some very prominent pitch changes and they're different samples so we can hear those changes. I'm going to go back to my LFO modulation page. Now the default is set to velocity, okay? As I showed you, if you want to do something fancy with the velocity to change the different layer levels, that's what you would use velocity start and velocity end for. But in the LFO modulation page, the default layer behavior is set to velocity. That is a separate thing. That just means your pad will play back as it would normally, just with one sample on it. You will hear the other samples layered up. But let's now set that to cycle. So it's cycling through those 4 different samples. Let's put note repeat on. I'm going to change the value of it to something slower. Let's go back to program edit. Now I'm going to trigger my pad with note repeat activated. Okay, I hope that makes sense. It's just cycling through those 4 samples that we've got on that one pad. If we now press random, it will randomly choose one of those layers, okay? And that might also sound nice with a higher time division on the note repeat. So that's really good for, you know, kind of weird percussive stuff. Anyway, that's what the different layer types are. Sample play, I've covered that. Now we've got velocity sensitivity, so we can change the pitch based on the velocity. So I'm going to take my full level setting off of my pads. So I'm going to do this on the snare drum so you can hear it. I'm going to increase the pitch. And as you can hear, it's increasing in pitch the harder I press my pad, which can give some nice effects. You can also do that with the attack, so I'm going to take the pitch off. See, it's a smoother attack now, based on the velocity. The amp, it's already set to 127, but if I take that down to 0, I'm going to take the attack off so we can just hear that. So now it's not having any effect. Okay, so the default for the velocity sensitivity is what it would be anyway. if you didn't have your full level button switched on. So that's the default value of that was 127 because of that. And then you can pan the sample with the velocity as well. So it is panned hard left, or, you know, towards the left if you kind of touch it lightly. Anyway, that's what that does. I'm nearly done. So that's the second row down. The third row down is the LFO. So we've got a number of LFO wave shapes. So we've got sine, triangle, sample and hold, sawtooth down, square wave, noise, and that's your lot. Okay, and we can set the rate, and we can, so that's like a non-synced rate, which is handy if you just want to kind of fine-tune stuff to your own taste, or you can sync it to different time divisions. So now I'm going to apply LFO. It's a sine wave, the rate is 16, and I'm going to add some pitch modulation to this snare. Now you can't hear it at lower values, it's too slow. And let's change the different waveform shapes. Now obviously, because this is a sine wave, we're not really hearing a big effect at this current rate setting. But a triangle is obviously a lot steeper curve. Then we've got sample and hold. So it doesn't take effect at a low rate, but if we increase the rate, okay, let's put a note repeat on that. Filter, we can add some filter modulation to that snare now. And the amp will just affect the volume. Okay, so you can apply modulation to the actual amp amount and the pan. Right, so that is LFO modulation covered. Now let's go to effects. So you can select to have them all on or all off. We've got none loaded at the moment, but if we double tap on any of these, we can select from a big list of all these different types of effects. So we can select there some different effects, but we can't swap these around. We can't sort of hold and drag those. That would be quite nice if we could, but we can't do that. Okay, we can edit them, so that gives us the edit settings for those plugins or those insert effects. And we've got those for every single one. Depending on what the effect is, you've got a different amount of edit selections that you can make. And then we can just set them to be on or off independently, or we can choose to switch them all off. The send effects here are sending the amount of an effect that you would have loaded onto what's known as a return track. So again, please go and check out my sends and returns video, and that will show you what sends and returns are and how they can be best utilized in the MPC Live. So I hope you've enjoyed the video, guys. Please put any comments or questions you've got down below. Please support me on Patreon if you would, it'd be much appreciated. And I will see you in the next one, where I shall be covering key group programs. This is Tubedigga, and I'm out!